Well, there's something happening today on social media that you might not even notice. Social media platforms will be pushed to their limits today. The European Union is putting them through a stress test to see whether they are doing enough to counter mis and disinformation in the lead up to next month's election happening in Germany. Joining us this morning is Brett Carraway. He is with the University of Toronto's Institute of Communication, Culture, Information and Technology. Exactly the voice we need for this story. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Just to let everybody know, this is who's being tested. Microsoft, TikTok, LinkedIn, Google, Snap, Meta, and X. So all the big ones. They've all been asked to take part in this stress test. Can you describe for us what that's going to look like? How will it work?
So it's like a roundtable conversation where the EU gets some of their sort of experts in digital platform management together. What the concern is that there's an election coming up in Germany. So this is kind of in the lead up to that election. And it's supposed to be sort of a demonstration and discussion to make sure that the platforms have some procedures, some tools in place to handle a variety of scenarios that they'll be presented with. And the scenarios are based on previous concerns, not necessarily about the platform, but just sort of more generally, like what could go wrong. And they'll be given the opportunity to show essentially what they have in place that could alleviate or mitigate the concerns of the EU commissioners.
So, Brett, just really quickly, so are they all sitting in a room, or does the EU sort of put something out on social media and then monitor how each of these platforms manages it?
So that's a great question. I actually don't know, but one of the things that I can tell you is that they kind of describe it as a roundtable conversation. So I think what they'll do is they'll probably present them with some scenarios, okay, probably like hypothetical situations, and then ask them to respond. And what I would imagine a good presenter would do would be able to demonstrate a tool set okay, themselves, maybe in sort of like a desktop conversation.
Interesting. This has been done before. Back in 2023, TikTok underwent a stress test, and officials found it had, quote, more work to do to prevent the spread of disinformation. I think some of that information was even used in that bill that was passed south of the border under the Biden administration. What happens when platforms don't pass this test? What are the consequences?
So on the sort of easy side, it can simply be, hey, we see some room for improvement, just as a series of recommendations, drawing attention to maybe where they're falling short of some of the EU specifications for the way in which an election is supposed to be conducted and what their obligations are there. On the more punitive side, it can be quite severe. They can be levied a fine that is equivalent to 6% of their global annual revenues.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, quite a bit. Or they can even be booted out of the European marketplace altogether. So there's quite a range there of what could happen.
We mentioned that this is being done because Germany has an election coming up, but let's look at our federal election that is on the horizon. In her final report into foreign election interference this week, Justice Marie-Josée Hogue wrote, "In my view, it is no exaggeration to say that at this juncture, information manipulation, whether foreign or not, poses the single biggest risk to our democracy." So what should Canada be doing to counter disinformation?
Well, Canada has, we have a country to the south which has a very permissive legal structure in place. So there's something called the CDA Act. It's from 1996, Communication Decency Act, and there's a provision in there, Section 230, which basically says that all of the major digital intermediary platforms have civil liability immunity. That was back when the World Wide Web was kind of just coming online and becoming part of our daily lives, and so they wanted to protect industry to give it a chance to grow. But it means that there's a real lack of accountability. Now Canada is part of something called the USMCA, which is the replacement for NAFTA, and it has a Section 230-like provision in it. So Canada doesn't have anything like what the EU has. It has something that's kind of more on the side of, so yeah, protecting from immunity. It would be nice if the Canadian context had something like the Digital Services Act, where we could actually make sure everybody's in compliance and had some clearly spelled out obligations and rights for users.
You bring up an important point because that agreement, the CUSMA, is about to be renegotiated, and that is an important part of it. And in the United States, Donald Trump has called punitive measures against these social media platforms a taxation by the EU. That's how he characterizes it. So we will wait and watch and see what happens in this stress test. Associate Professor at the University of Toronto, Brett Carraway, thanks for your time this morning. Have a good weekend.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. If you liked that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.